Hear the name Isaac Newton, you probably think, okay, cold hard mechanics,
Yeah.
calculus, gravity, the laws governing the cosmos. The guy who basically...
The intuition that was really driving those calculations. So today, we're doing a deep dive into the other Newton.
The alchemist, the theologian.
Exactly. The vitalist Newton, who was absolutely convinced that this purely mechanical universe idea was, well, a distortion. He even saw it as atheistic, maybe even the work of the devil.
Which is such a fascinating contradiction, isn't it? The man who wrote the Principia Mathematica, literally the foundational text for treating the universe like this giant machine, privately hated that very idea, hated the concept of a dead, inert mechanism.
Absolutely hated it. He fundamentally believed in these living, vital forces running through nature, forces you could just never boil down to simple clockwork. The source material shows he was really obsessed with this idea of a constantly renewing, living world.
Right.
Big space.
And that brings us right to the central scientific puzzle of his time.
Yeah.
Action at a distance.
Yeah.
If the universe is just emptiness, how does the sun pull on the Earth? He needed something physical there.
He needed the ether, an invisible, everywhere present fluid or medium filling all of space. But crucially, he didn't see it as just some passive gas properties. And, well, for anything to wave sound needs air, ripples need water.
Seismic waves need the Earth.
Exactly. Waves need a medium. So if space is empty, what's actually waving? What's doing the moving when light travels?
It's a basic question, but it points to this fundamental inconsistency in physics that arguably still hasn't been fully resolved.
Precisely. And this leads us to that common story we're all told. The ether was debunked, the famous Michelson-Morley experiment in the late 19th. To detect one specific model of the ether, a static 19th century version, isn't proof that no medium exists at all.
It just proved that that model was wrong.
Correct. But physics sort of threw the baby out with the bathwater. They concluded the ether itself was gone completely and started building particle physics theories without any underlying medium.
Newton's intuition was actually spot on, that a pervasive, dynamic medium isn't just possible, it's structurally necessary.
And that's the mission for this deep dive.
Yeah.
The material suggests we should just maybe, trust Newton's bigger picture, his holistic philosophical ideas, the foundation he built his math on.
The argument being, if his calculus was so spectacularly right, we still use it constantly, why should we just dismiss the worldview that produced it?
Exactly. And the answer, according to these sources, lies in a pretty radical modern theory called PSUMOT. That's PSUMOT, the psychedelic superfluid universal morphonic oceanic wave theory.
A unified hydrodynamic system doesn't just vindicate Newton's intuition, it might actually solve some of the biggest problems in modern cosmology.
That's the claim. We're going to explore
this integrated vision he had. How did his deep private belief and vitalism in living forces directly lead him to need the ether scientifically?
Well, his vitalism wasn't just a passing thought. It was profound. He was an incredibly serious alchemist. People sometimes dismiss that, but his private writings, especially fiction as a one-off mechanical event like winding up a clock, for him it was this constant process, always renewing, always alive. God might set up the basic forms, the protoplasts, but more
about trying to, reverse engineer the living agent of creation. Finding that active principle.
Precisely. He was searching for the active living agent behind transformation. And then around 1675-76, he was sort of pushed into publicly explaining the mechanism behind his theories of light. That's when he presented his hypothesis to the Royal Society. And this document, it's where his private vitalism starts to really leak into his public science.
Okay, so what did he actually propose in this hypothesis? What was this ether he described?
He put forward this idea that, and I'm quoting loosely here, the whole frame of nature may be nothing but various contextuals of some certain ethereal spirits or vapors, put there initially by God, he said, but ever since driven by the power of nature. And here's the absolute key phrase. He proposed that all things be originated from ether.
Originated from it. So it's not just filling space, it's the source material.
Exactly. This isn't just some inert filler gas. This is the original substance, constantly active
field. A kind of divine fluid that's the source of everything, mass, energy.
Which is exactly why he needed it. His contemporaries mostly thought of ether as just some invisible fluid. But Newton used it to give a physical explanation for all those mysterious forces that didn't fit a purely mechanical view: electricity, magnetism, and the big one, gravity.
Because without something pushing or mediating, gravity just looked like magic, acting across empty space, which his critics hammered him on, right?
Oh, constantly. They accused him of reintroducing occult qualities into science. He desperately needed the ether to make his beautiful mathematical equations physically plausible, to give them a mechanism.
Okay, so let's fast forward. Late 19th century. The wave nature of light is undeniable by then, so the need for some kind of medium seems inescapable. What was the dominant idea about the ether before Michelson-Morley?
The prevailing model then was the luminiferous ether. And the key assumption was that it was essentially rigid and crucially static, like a fixed cosmic jelly filling all space, a universal rest frame against which everything else moved.
And the Michelson-Morley experiment was designed to detect Earth's motion through this fixed jelly.
Yes, their setup was incredibly sensitive. They were looking for a tiny difference in the speed of light, a phase shift between beams traveling with the Earth's motion through the ether and beams traveling perpendicular to it. Filler gas. This is the original substance, constantly active.
Field, a kind of divine fluid that's the source of everything, mass, energy.
Which is exactly why he needed it. His contemporaries mostly thought of ether as just some invisible fluid. But Newton used it to give a physical explanation for all those mysterious forces that didn't fit a purely mechanical view: electricity, magnetism, and the big one, gravity.
Because without something pushing or mediating, gravity just looked like magic, acting across empty space, which his critics hammered him on, right?
Oh, constantly. They accused him of reintroducing occult qualities into science. He desperately needed the ether to make his beautiful mathematical equations physically plausible, to give them a mechanism.
Okay, so let's fast forward. Late 19th century. The wave nature of light is undeniable by then, so the need for some kind of medium seems inescapable. What was the dominant idea about the ether before Michelson-Morley?
The prevailing model then was the luminiferous ether. And the key assumption was that it was essentially rigid and crucially static, like a fixed cosmic jelly filling all space, a universal rest frame against which everything else moved.
And the Michelson-Morley experiment was designed to detect Earth's motion through this fixed jelly.
Yes, their setup was incredibly sensitive. They were looking for a tiny difference in the speed of light, a phase shift between beams traveling with the Earth's motion through the ether and beams traveling perpendicular to it.
And they found nothing. No detectable ether wind, which was interpreted as, well, the end of the ether.
And this, the sources argue, is where the big structural mistake happened. The null result didn't necessarily mean no ether exists. It just proved the ether wasn't static, or maybe not rigid, or perhaps not detectable in the way a classical static medium would be.
It invalidated that specific model.
Exactly. But instead of updating the concept of the medium, the search was largely abandoned. Physics pivoted away, and this forced science into this really awkward position, keeping the wave description of light, which logically needs a medium, while simultaneously discarding the medium itself.
It baked a fundamental inconsistency right into the foundations of physics, forcing light to be this weird hybrid, a wave and a particle, without a clear picture of the underlying reality.
The ultimate paradox. And this inconsistency, this ongoing struggle to unify particle physics with gravity, maybe suggests that Newton's original insight that you need some kind of unifying fluid medium wasn't wrong after all. Maybe it was the necessary next step that science skipped over.
Okay, so let's jump right into the 21st century then, and this modern concept that supposedly functions like Newton's ether, PSUMOT, that acronym again is psychedelic, superfluid, universal morphonic, oceanic wave theory. It's quite a mouthful. Maybe we should break down those components first, especially the more jarring ones.
Yeah, absolutely. Conceptually, we can simplify it. Think of it as describing the universe as one giant, coherent, fluid information system. Superfluid nails down the physics of the medium.
Okay.
Universal and oceanic obviously define its scope. It's everywhere. Morphonic relates to how structures, forms, patterns emerge from this fluid. And then psychedelic. That's the most, let's say, evocative term. It directly links the informational structure of the cosmos to the nature of consciousness itself. We'll definitely circle back to that part.
All right, let's stick with the physics for now. PSUMOT reframes the universe's fundamental structure as a continuous, coherent quantum entity, a cosmic superfluid substrate. What exactly makes it a superfluid, and why is that so important?
Okay, so a superfluid is a state of matter, usually achieved at incredibly low temperatures, where quantum effects become visible on a macroscopic scale. Specifically, we're talking about something called a Bose-Einstein condensate, or BEC.
That's one of those bizarre macroscopic quantum phenomena, right?
Exactly. Normally, quantum weirdness stays down at the atomic level. But in a BEC, huge numbers of particles lose their individual identities. They basically merge and behave as one single unified quantum entity governed by a single wave function.
Okay.
And the two key properties that make it the perfect candidate for a cosmic medium are, one, this macroscopic coherence, meaning it acts as a unified whole across vast scales, and two, zero viscosity. It flows absolutely without any friction or drag.
Ah, zero viscosity. That immediately gets rid of the problems that plagued the old static ether theories, like planets losing energy as they move through it.
Precisely. No drag. And if it's coherent, it provides a natural way for quantum information, quantum entanglement, to be maintained across cosmic distances.
Okay, so if the universe is this single, unified, superfluid entity, how did that change our picture of the dark sector? Dark matter and dark energy, the 95% of the universe we can't see.
Well, it unifies them beautifully and elegantly. PSUMOT proposes they aren't two separate mysterious things at all. They are simply two aspects of the same single entity, its substance and its motion.
So dark matter is this substance.
Yes, dark matter is the superfluid substrate itself. It's the physical medium, the cosmic scale BEC that fills space and has mass.
And dark energy, the thing driving the accelerated expansion.
That's the motion. It's the universal current. PSUMO defines dark energy not as some weird property of empty space, but as the inherent macroscopic large-scale flow of the entire superfluid. It's the kinetic energy of the cosmic ocean itself.
And this bulk flow is what generates the expansion.
Yes, the model suggests this inherent universal flow generates the necessary dynamic negative pressure that drives the accelerated expansion of the universe.
Which is fundamentally different from the standard model's lambda, the cosmological constant, which is seen as static, unchanging energy density of the vacuum itself.
Completely different. And this unification immediately addresses something called the coincidence problem.
Right, the awkward question in standard cosmology. Why do the amounts of dark matter and dark energy appear to be so weirdly comparable right now in this particular cosmic era? It seems like a huge coincidence.
PSUMO, it says, nope, not a coincidence at all. If dark matter is the substance, the fluid, and dark energy is its motion, the kinetic energy of the flow, then they are intrinsically linked aspects of the same system. Their comparable densities today are just the kinetic energy of the flow, then they are intrinsically linked aspects of the same system. Their comparable densities today are just a natural hydrodynamical consequence of how that system evolves over time.
It's like asking why a river has both water and flow. They're inseparable parts of the same thing.
Exactly. It ceases to be a fine-tuning problem and becomes just, well, fluid dynamics.
Okay, but if the universe is this superfluid, we have to revisit gravity. Newton needed his ether partly to explain gravity's mechanism. Einstein came along and said gravity is the curvature of space-time. If PSUMO is right, what happens to Einstein's picture? Where does gravity come from?
This is probably the most radical break with mainstream physics. PSUMO redefines gravity. It's seen as an emergent effective force, not a fundamental property of space-time geometry itself.
So not fundamental curvature.
No. Instead, gravity arises where ordinary matter interacts with the superfluid. Think of clumps of matter, stars, planets, galaxies as being like rocks in the river. They create drag or localized disruptions, like eddies or wakes, in the universal superfluid current.
So general relativity, which works incredibly well mathematically, is maybe describing the geometry of that disruption, but not the underlying physical cause of the force.
That's the idea. GR gives you the shape of the distortion, but PSUMO proposes the mechanism. And the mechanism is straightforward fluid dynamics. The force we perceive as gravitational attraction is actually caused by the pressure of the surrounding, undisturbed superfluid.
A pressure force, pushing things together.
Yes, it's often called acoustic gravity or entropic gravity. When a mass disrupts the superfluid locally, it creates a sort of low-pressure zone or shadow around it. The higher pressure of the surrounding undisturbed superfluid then pushes matter concentrations towards each other into these low-pressure zones.
Like two boats drifting together in a current because the water pressure between them is slightly lower.
Exactly that kind of principle. It turns gravity from a mysterious pull into a comprehensible push, driven by pressure differences in the underlying medium. Newton would have likely appreciated a physical mechanism like that.
Definitely. And what about the specific structures formed by these disruptions in the superfluid? You mentioned vortices.
Yes. In superfluids, localized disturbances naturally form quantized vortices. These are tiny, incredibly stable, spinning whirlpools. And because they are spinning, they inherently possess an asymmetry, a handedness.
meaning they spin either clockwise or counterclockwise.
Right. They have an intrinsic chirality.
And that potentially links the biggest forces in the cosmos, gravity, expansion, right down to the fundamental building blocks of life.
That's the really intriguing connection. This intrinsic chirality in the fundamental medium, these spinning vortices at the quantum level, could provide a physical, hydrodynamic basis for molecular homochirality.
The fact that life on Earth almost exclusively uses left-handed amino acids and right-handed sugars.
Exactly. Why only one hand? Maybe the local superfluid environment, shaped by these inherently chiral vortices arising from gravitational disruptions, preferentially selects or stabilizes matter with a corresponding handedness during formation. It offers a physical, non-magical explanation for a deep biological mystery.
What makes this PSUMOT idea particularly compelling, beyond just sounding elegant, is the claim that it doesn't just describe things nicely, it actually provides structural justification for bringing back a dynamic ether. It does this, apparently, by offering physical solutions to the three biggest mathematical headaches in standard cosmology, the Lambda-CDM model.
Right. I mean, if you're going to challenge a model as successful as Lambda-EM, you can't just offer a different story. You need to show your framework is structurally superior, that it resolves problems the old model can't handle without adding lots of extra complexity or just shrugging. PSUMOT claims it can do just that.
Okay, let's take them one by one. First, the big one, the cosmological constant problem, often called the worst prediction in the history of physics. Standard physics calculates the expected energy of empty space, lambda-tor, and gets it wrong by, how much is it?
The estimates vary slightly, but it's somewhere between 60 and 120 orders of magnitude wrong. It's almost impossible to even comprehend an error that large.
How does that calculation even happen? Where does the standard model prediction come from?
It comes from trying to combine quantum field theory, QFT, with general relativity, GR. QFT predicts that even empty space should be fizzing with virtual particles, contributing a huge amount of energy, the zero-point energy of all quantum fields. When you plug that energy density into Einstein's equations for GR,
Disaster.
utter catastrophe. The calculated energy is so immense, its gravitational effect should either have instantly crushed the universe back into a singularity or blown it apart so fast that not even atoms could form. The observed expansion requires a value for lambda that is, yes, 120 orders of magnitude smaller.
It's a staggering mismatch. It basically screams that either QFT or GR, or how we're combining them when thinking about the vacuum, is fundamentally broken.
And this is where PSUMOT performs what the sources call a structural bypass. The whole problem arises because standard physics ties dark energy to the intrinsic static energy density of the quantum vacuum itself. PSUMOT just steps around that entirely.
How? By redefining dark energy.
Exactly. It shifts the explanation completely. Instead of grounding dark energy in the problematic static energy of the vacuum, PSUMOT grounds it in the dynamic bulk flow of a physical fluid, the cosmic superfluid.
So it's not about the energy inherent emptiness, but the kinetic energy of the stuff filling that space.
Precisely. It approaches the problem from the perspective of condensed matter physics, the physics of fluids, coherence, and flow, rather than high-energy particle physics and vacuum states. By defining dark energy as the kinetic energy of the superfluid's universal current, the model just avoids the calculation that leads to the 120 orders of magnitude disaster.
It sidesteps the paradox by changing the fundamental premise of what dark energy is.
It eliminates the parameter that was causing the catastrophic conflict between QFT and GR in the first place. That's a pretty powerful structural argument in its favor.
Okay, that's a compelling solution to problem one.
Yeah.
Let's move to crisis number two, the Hubble tension.
Yeah.
This is the discrepancy in the measured expansion rate of the universe, right?
Yeah. Measurements of the very early universe, mainly from the cosmic microwave background CMB radiation, consistently give us an expansion rate, the Hubble constant, h$ of about 67 kilometers per second per megaparsec.
Okay.
But measurements of the local modern universe using things like Type Ia supernovae or Cepheid variable stars consistently give a higher value, around 73 kilometers MPC, and the error bars on these measurements have shrunk enough that they no longer overlap. It's about a 5 sigma tension, which in physics terms means it's highly unlikely to be just random error.
So the universe seems to be expanding faster today nearby than it was globally back then. How does the standard Lambda-CDM model handle this?
Well, it struggles. The standard model predicts h$ should be constant. So the tension implies either there's some systematic error in one or both types of measurement that we haven't found yet, or we need to add some kind of new exotic physics to the early universe to make the models match the data, things like early dark energy, interacting dark sectors. It gets complicated fast.
But PSUMOT offers a simpler explanation, based on the fluid dynamics.
A much simpler and arguably more elegant hydrodynamic explanation. It suggests the difference is real, it's not measurement error, but it's also not due to exotic new physics. It's a direct physical consequence of living in a structured, flowing medium.
Back to the rocks in the river idea.
Exactly, but applied dynamically to the expansion flow itself. Those massive structures, galaxies, clusters, superclusters aren't just passive lumps. They are the rocks, creating turbulence and drag in the cosmic superfluid current, which is dark energy in this model. If our local region of the universe is situated within, say, the gravitational influence or mass, that local turbulence would naturally increase the average flow rate of the superfluid in our neighborhood.
Ah, I see. So the CMB measurement of 67 reflects the smooth average flow of the universal current way back when the universe was very homogeneous. But our local measurement of 73 reflects the fact that we're currently in a slightly more turbulent, faster flowing patch of the cosmic river today because of the clumpy structure around us.
Precisely. The Hubble tension stops being a crisis or a tension and becomes a predictable natural consequence of hydrodynamics in a structured universe. It turns what looks like a statistical anomaly into a physical observation about our local cosmic environment.
That's neat. It makes intuitive sense. Okay, third crisis. The hints of dynamic dark energy.
Right. The standard lambda CDM model is built on the idea that the cosmological constant, lambda, is perfectly, well, constant. This translates to a specific equation of state parameter for dark energy called dollars, which must be exactly equal to -1.
Meaning the pressure is exactly the negative of its energy density, and it doesn't change over time.
Correct, it's static. However, some recent large-scale cosmological surveys, things like the Dark Energy Survey, ESI and others, are starting to return results for twin dollars that are tantalizingly close to -1, but perhaps not exactly -1. There are hints, still debated, that dollars might be slightly different or maybe even changing over time.
Which, if confirmed, would be a major problem for the standard model because lambda has to be constant.
It would fundamentally break the lambda SCDM model. But for PSUMOT, this possibility is actually expected.
Because a fluid current isn't necessarily static.
Exactly. If dark energy is the bulk flow of a vast, nearly frictionless quantum superfluid, the universal current, you'd expect it to have dynamic properties. Its flow rate, its pressure might not be perfectly constant everywhere or at all times. It could evolve, change, respond to the structures within it. So the potential observation of an evolving dynamic dark energy is perfectly consistent with the PSUMOT framework, unlike the strictly static lambda of the standard model.
Okay, pulling all this together, the fact that this single concept, a universal superfluid medium, seems to elegantly resolve these major cosmological crises brings us right back to that core question about Newton. If his math, his mechanics were so incredibly accurate, why did science basically throw out the philosophical worldview that underpinned it? The worldview that suggested this very kind of medium in the first place?
The sources really push us towards a specific philosophical stance here. If Newton was, let's just say it colloquially, right about most of the stuff he studied deeply, then maybe the fundamental error wasn't in his thinking, but in how science after him decided to compartmentalize knowledge.
The mistake was separating the physics, the equations, from the philosophy, the nature of the medium the equations described.
Precisely. Newton himself didn't see that separation. For him, the world was an integrated whole. His physics, his alchemy, his theology, they were all parts of trying to understand the same living, dynamic cosmos.
And the key concept that bridges Newton's, somewhat spiritual conception of the ether with this 21st century quantum superfluid picture is information.
Absolutely. That seems to be the ultimate unifying thread in the PSUMOT framework. Information is presented as the primary substance of reality. The universe isn't just matter and energy moving around. It's fundamentally a colossal, self-organizing information system.
So the superfluid isn't just physical stuff. It's the carrier medium for quantum information.
Exactly. It's a cosmic-scale quantum state, the fundamental substrate that carries and processes quantum information, allowing complexity to emerge from the large-scale structure of the universe right down to potentially things like molecular chirality.
Okay, if the universe is fundamentally informational, then consciousness has to fit into that picture somehow. How does PSU handle the mind, the observer?
It draws heavily on theories like integrated information theory, IIT, which defines consciousness mathematically as integrated information, often symbolized by physics phi.
Right, IIT suggests consciousness isn't about what a system is made of, but about its capacity to bind information together into a unified, irreducible whole.
Precisely. And this completely flips the standard neuroscientific assumption.
Which is usually that the brain somehow generates consciousness out of non-conscious matter, leading to the famous hard problem of consciousness.
PSUMOT takes a different approach. The brain isn't seen as the generator of consciousness. Instead, it's more like a highly complex receiver, filter, or processor. It tunes into the universal informational field, the superfluid.
So the brain's complexity allows it to tap into and locally organize this universal consciousness field.
Yes, the idea is that the intricate structure of the brain enables it to organize the underlying superfluid into an incredibly complex, localized pattern of iterated information. The sources use the evocative phrase, a high-fidelity whirlpool within the broader cosmic ocean of information.
So consciousness isn't created by the brain, but received and structured by the brain from a universal source.
That's the model. It resonates strongly with Newton's vitalism, doesn't it? A living principle pervading everything, which complex structures like brains can interact with more intensely.
It does. And this brings us back to the idea of fragmentation. The sources argue that the scientific decision to split mind from matter, the classic Cartesian split, wasn't just a useful simplification, but a kind of psychological error.
Yes, they frame it as a collective parallax error. We need to unpack that term a bit.
Okay. Parallax is how we perceive depth, right? Using two slightly different viewpoints, like our two eyes, to triangulate distance.
Exactly. You need two perspectives for true depth perception. The psychological argument here is that Western culture, and particularly modern science, has become psychologically one-sided. It has rigidly clung to one dominant conscious attitude, scientific rationalism, materialism, mechanism, while actively suppressing or devaluing the opposite pole, the intuitive, the spiritual, the non-rational, what Jung might call the collective shadow.
So by dismissing the vitalist, alchemical, more holistic aspects of Newton's thought as unscientific or primitive, we were effectively trying to understand reality with only one eye open.
That's the analogy. And just like looking with one eye flattens your perception and distorts perspective, this collective one-sidedness leads to a profound loss of depth in our understanding of the world. We end up with a distorted, fragmented view because we're denying half the picture, the interconnectedness of mind and matter, observer and observed.
And what happens psychologically when a whole culture suppresses one side of reality like that?
The energy doesn't just vanish. According to these psychological models, the repressed energy festers in the unconscious, becoming distorted, primitive, and potentially destructive. The sources use the Greek term enantiodromia, which literally means running counter to. It's the tendency for any extreme one-sidedness to violently flip into its opposite.
So pushing extreme rationalism might paradoxically lead to eruptions of extreme irrationality. Pushing pure mechanism might lead to a violent return of the repressed spirit.
That's the dynamic. You see it historically, socially, politically. When one attitude is pushed too far, its opposite tends to erupt in a compensatory, often chaotic way. The argument is that the scientific separation of physics from philosophy, of the mathematical description from the nature of the medium, is a reflection of this deeper psychological split in our culture.
And Newton's holistic view, the source quote, was something like, "The chemistry of consciousness and the chemistry of nature is intertwined and complex, and the idea of where one stops and the other begins is folly." That view becomes essential for stability.
It becomes a structural requirement, not just philosophically nice. If we accept the premise that Newton was fundamentally right about the unity of reality, then the PSUMOT key framework, the single informational fluid expressed through both cosmic hydrodynamics and human perception, looks like the physical manifestation of that unity.
The implication being that the same fragmentation that leads to paradoxes in physics might also be linked to the psychological and societal fragmentation that leads to conflict and self-destruction. It's all interconnected.
That seems to be the core argument. A unified physics requires a unified psyche, and vice versa.
Wow. Okay, so we've traced quite an arc here. From, 17th century alchemy and Newton's idea of a vital spirit filling space, all the way to a 21st century quantum superfluid model that seems to structurally resolve massive problems like the Hubble tension and the cosmological constant disaster.
Yeah.
The connecting thread seems to be the absolute necessity of some kind of dynamic, unifying informational medium.
It really is a remarkable conceptual convergence. The alignment between Newton's deep intuition about a living, active cosmos and the features of this proposed superfluid model is, well, it's striking. It strongly suggests that maybe the biggest misstep in science after Newton wasn't about refining his math, but about the decision to fragment his integrated worldview, to discard the holistic philosophical framework that actually produced that incredible math.
And as we wrap up this deep dive, it's worth returning to that final provocative idea from the source material, that this unified framework doesn't just change how we see cosmology, but potentially how we understand human perception itself, this idea of a sixth sense.
Right. It's presented not as some vague psychic ability, but as a genuine perceptual faculty, the capacity to perceive dimensions of reality beyond the purely material or mechanical, maybe the informational or spiritual dimensions inherent in the superfluid, a faculty that, like any sense, can be underdeveloped, ignored, or even damaged.
The analogy used was color blindness, wasn't it? Someone who is colorblind doesn't realize what they're missing. They're, quote, insensible of his loss because they simply can't perceive that range of reality.
Exactly. So the question becomes, if the PSUMOT model is pointing in the right direction, if the physical cosmos and human consciousness really are unified through this single informational superfluid, then what crucial information, what colors of reality, what, as Newton might have put it, long-lost truths, are we missing because our dominant cultural perspective, our collective parallax error, keeps one eye firmly shut?
Are we collectively colorblind to the deeper unified nature of things because we've overprivileged the analytical fragmented view?
That's the profound challenge posed. The sources suggest that cultivating what they call psychological parallax, consciously and rigorously working to integrate the other side, the non-rational, the intuitive, the holistic perspective alongside the analytical, might be necessary not just for psychological health, but for achieving a more accurate scientific understanding. Could developing this capacity put us in better resonance with the actual unified, flowing nature of the cosmos?
It raises the question of whether achieving true clarity, both scientifically and societally, might depend on consciously cultivating this neglected sixth sense, this ability to perceive the whole, to avoid the destructive consequences of fragmentation, the enantiodronia.
It suggests the key to unlocking the universe's deepest secrets might not just be about looking further outward with telescopes, but also looking inward to heal that fundamental split between mind and matter, observer and observed within ourselves. A truly holistic endeavor, one that Isaac Newton, the alchemist and the physicist, might have recognized.